Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Mental Health TV. We've got a cracking session for you today. We're going to be looking at what makes good mental health for children. But before we get into that and introduce our fantastic guest, let me go over to Dave so he can tell you how you can join in, how you can ask any questions, because we always love to hear what you've got to say. Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Nicky. Hi, everyone. So we've got a few ways that you can join in tonight. The first is on Facebook Live. You're watching this, you can just head to the right of the screen and type in any questions or comments you've got. The other two options we've got is either on Blue Sky or X. You just need to use the hashtag MHTV. I'll be posting on Blue Sky, not particularly on X, but I'll look for questions on both. Without further ado, straight back to you, Nicky.
Okay, so let's introduce our fantastic guest. Sam, do you want to say hello and tell people about your area of interest?
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Nicky. Thank you for having me. I'm Sam Chapman. I'm a mental health nurse. I work as a mental health nurse academic over at Aston University in Birmingham. So I'm a mental health nurse, but I also have a master's in public health. So I have a real interest in promoting mental health, promoting good mental health. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. How do we enable children to have good mental health rather than thinking about how do we identify mental illness in children? How do we create an environment that enables children to develop and have good mental health?
Yeah, that's a really brilliant thing. There's a lot for us to think about in terms of that. And also, I think, as Sam was saying before we started, we really often put the emphasis, particularly in mental health, on risk, on problems, on what's wrong. So it can actually take a bit of an effort to kind of retool ourselves to looking at what we're aiming at, what do we want to see in terms of positive well-being. So you've got some slides to share with us. So hopefully I'll be able to share them now. And for anyone listening, don't worry, we'll describe what you're seeing.
Yep. Thank you. So I am doing my doctoral research in exactly what I just said. So thinking about how do schools enable children to have good mental health. So before I started my data collection, I really needed to identify what exactly is good mental health. Even as a mental health nurse, I struggled to kind of think about what am I looking for? And we have lots of different words that we get kind of pushed around in terms of children and young people's mental health, particularly things like resilience is a big one, and flourishing, and, you know, ideas around a sense of belonging and mental health literacy. And I really didn't know where those sat with one another. I needed kind of to contextualize them, to pop them into some kind of framework. So I did something called a concept analysis. So a concept analysis is where you take a concept or a word. So for this, I took the phrase good mental health, and then I did a big systematic literature search on articles where that phrase existed within that article. I narrowed it down to children and young people between the ages of 5 and 18, and to papers that were focused within the UK. So I didn't look external to the UK because my research is in the UK. I ended up having only 12 articles. So the phrase good mental health didn't really start to emerge in literature until around 2010, 2011, which is really interesting. So what I'm presenting here in the slides, and I'll describe it for people, is the kind of the findings from the concept analysis. So within the concept analysis, there's a framework that I followed. I followed the Walker and Avant framework, which talks you how to read through those articles and pull out the different strands of what exactly is the attribute or the symptom, if you like, of what good mental health is. And that's this middle column here. So I see this really as a beginning platform to explore what good mental health is. So by no means set in stone. And actually, as I'm continuing with my research, it's changing ever so slightly. So what is good mental health? So the attributes here is that a young person would demonstrate positive coping skills, have a developed formation of self, have autonomy and agency, would engage in health promoting ways of being, would be able to demonstrate good interpersonal skills, would have hope, and would be having social integration. But as I'm currently in my doctorate, I'm currently transcribing the data, and already that's been reworded to having healthy social integration.
Yeah.
So that's what we'd see in a young person.
Okay.
And then on the right is another column, which I've titled Exceeds Good Mental Health. So in here, I mean, in the framework, they call it the consequences of, but in here, I've popped the word resilience. So that came up in the articles, as did flourishing and sustained good mental health. So I think this is really important, because we talk about young people having resilience all the time, but we don't know we're resilient until we've emerged out of the difficult time that we're in. So it's only by looking back and reflecting can we think, gosh, I was really resilient at that point. But in the moment, whatever's happening in, you know, personal lives, school lives, exams, in that moment, what we're really asking children to have is good mental health, to be able to cope, to be able to manage, to be able to draw on those skills, to be able to push through and emerge from that difficult situation with good mental health to some degree. Whereas I think resilience is actually above and beyond that.
Yeah. I'm getting so many questions, but I'm just going to carry on clicking until you tell me to stop.
Okay. And then the left-hand column, there's quite a lot in the left-hand column, so I won't read it all out, but I'll read some out. The left-hand column is the kind of the concepts that promote good mental health. So within those research papers and the articles, drawing out what did people talk about or imply would be promoting of the attributes, which I just read out about autonomy and agency and hope and social integration. And so these are the things in the left column that I'm looking at in my research. How can schools do these things, and what do these things look like within a school environment, which will help all children, not just those who are considered to have poorer mental health, but how can they enable all children to have the opportunities to have and develop and strengthen their good mental health. So in this column, we've got things like connection and belonging, mental health literacies within here, a balanced environment. So this was about not too easy, but not too challenging for them. Adults with emotional intelligence, creativity, developing and enabling agency, and then things like opportunities to develop those skills. And there's other things in there, but I won't read them all out. That's it. I'll stop there if you've got some questions so far.
No, I think it's really interesting. I mean, one of the things that we have a problem with in mental health is actually being able to articulate what it is we do and what it is that we want. So actually this way of really defining, you know, your key terms, your questions, your ideas is so important, such an important skill, particularly practitioners, whether they're doing it for clinical practice or for academic credit, to be able to be really clear, to be able to think about, to be able to define their terms, to be able to say exactly, explicitly what it is you're trying to achieve and what would be above and beyond that and what would promote it. Because those things are really different. And often you see such jumbles with work that actually seeing this is how you separate those ideas out so that you can investigate them properly. I think that's really useful, even for like first year, second year students writing an essay, you know, getting your key terms straight in your head before you start is so key. So thank you for sharing that. Well, I think one of the things I was wondering at is you said you were looking at between 5 and 18. Is there a difference? Because, you know, thinking about how different a human being is at the age of 5 to 18, fingers crossed different, I mean. What will it be the same for the upper and lower end of that, for younger children and for young adults?
That's a really good question. In my concept analysis, the literature, I focused it on those ages 5 to 18, and there wasn't anything that really stood out as being gender specific or age specific. You know, there wasn't any strong pulls towards that. The research, my doctoral research, was based in a secondary school. So I have focused that on the sort of top end of that age range group. And I interviewed children, young adult, young people, I think is the phrase, young people who were in years 8 and year 9 are the ages that I interviewed. And that was really interesting. And I'll talk about that a bit later. But the reason I chose to interview years 8 and 9 was because originally I was just going to choose 1 year group to interview. But the school staff said years 8 and 9, they really notice quite a significant emotional difference between the two
Okay.
year groups, and they thought it'd be interesting to capture, if possible, kind of the different ages to try and kind of draw on those differences. I actually haven't found that in my interviews with young people.
And just for anyone who doesn't have kids, can you say how old year 8 and year 9 are again?
Yeah, sorry. So I what is it? Year 8 is, it's easier for me to say year 9 because my son's year 9, so that's 13 to 14-year-olds. So year 8 it must be 12 to 13.
Okay. Well, that's
Yeah. So
interesting.
second year of senior school and third year of senior school.
And it's interesting, isn't it, this idea there's no difference between gender, because I don't know if it's just because of recent television, but there's been an expectation, isn't there, that women, young girls and young boys develop at different ages and have different levels of kind of emotional flourishing, which is interesting.
The thing that's really amazed me, and I went into this research wanting to really draw out the young person's voice. And so I went in expecting them to have something interesting to say. I'm already on their side. And even I was absolutely blown away by just the depth of insight and knowledge that people had. Like, there were things that I thought that they completely disagreed with. And when they gave me the rationale, it was like, wow, I never saw it this way.
Well, let's go on to the next slide and actually sort of dig into that a bit more then, because that's really interesting.
Okay. I'll only go through these very quickly. I'm sure people probably won't be able to read them. There's just, for people that are listening in, there's a slide that's got those initial attributes of what is good mental health. It's got those headings on. And then under the headings, it's got the broken down sort of further concepts that fits under each heading. So I've themed everything I found in the articles, I've themed under the headings. That's how the headings were formed. So for example, under developed formation of self, there's self-efficacy, self-regulation, sense of competence, identity formation, self-awareness, self-concept, positive internalization of health promoting messages, confidence and positive self-esteem. And then the numbers next to these are the numbers of the articles. So you can see, for example, positive self-esteem, article 12 and 6 spoke about that one.
That's really interesting. I guess the things that sort of jump out to me are there's really high expectations around children's development. But then if you're saying that they meet your expectations and exceed them, maybe that's a good thing. And the other thing that really makes me, because I was obviously, I'm super old. So I was brought up in like 70s and 80s, which was hardcore parenting, as opposed to like the parenting that my nieces and nephews have, which is much more gentle. And I don't remember when I was growing up anything about self-regulation or self-soothing or anything like that, other than don't cry, which I don't think is terribly helpful.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's really interesting that the idea that do students actually, or young people that you were interviewing, actually recognize those terms?
I think they don't necessarily have the skills that they need. So when I say they exceeded my expectations, they exceeded it in having insight into the sort of the frustrations and the experiences they're having at school. And they were aware that they were having to play the game, if that's the right phrase. They knew they were in a system that has these rules, and they were figuring out how to live and survive within a system of rules that didn't really always help them.
But it's interesting, isn't it? And they figured that out really early, because I think a lot of people go through life never realizing that actually school's as much about socialization as it is education and about learning. And, it prepares citizens for its society, doesn't it? So different societies have different educations because they want different outcomes. And the fact that children and young people are already identifying that is really kind of impressive. Interesting.
And so then the next slide is the same again, but that's about the antecedents, so what promotes good mental health. So all of those different headings are broken down. So I won't go into that in any more detail. And then the last, I think there's one more slide, is there?
Before we go on, there's an interesting one here about that balanced environment. So just to dig into that. So not overprotecting, not ignoring people. that balance of haven and challenge and structure and freedom. And that seems to me really key, because if you're talking about, actually, key part of health is being able to manage yourself and being able to manage your responses. When you can't manage your environment, like if a bell goes, you have to do the thing that it says. If a lesson is here, you have to go to that lesson. That to me it sets up such a lot of tensions. I think it's really interesting. And also for parents as well, how much do you protect? How much do you value freedom? How much do you, give autonomy? So is there anything you want to just think about in terms of that? How do you get that?
So I've got loads to say on this, Nicky. So in terms of the findings that are emerging, so bearing in mind I'm halfway through transcribing the interviews, and I've not got to the full analysis yet, but there's some really clear findings. And one of the things is that the school environment is really incongruent with young people being able to have the best opportunities to develop good mental health. So I feel almost like what the young people are saying is that, and the staff that I interviewed, that there's almost like trauma with a little t. So at the school that I was at, pupils had 3 minutes to get from one lesson to another. So if they were, and this came out in the pupils interviews, if they were in one side of the building and needed to get to the other, I timed myself walking it on a time of day when there was nobody in the corridors, and I managed to do it, but it took me over 2 minutes just without anyone else in the corridors. So they were saying it's such a tight turnaround for us to get from one room to another when we're in opposite sides of the building. And so we have to sometimes run, but then we get a detention for running in the corridor. But if we don't run, we get a detention for being late to class. And so they're having to figure out these kind of almost like ethical dilemmas, really, about when do I run, how do I avoid getting caught, and actually trying to avoid getting a detention. So it's almost like this underlying, perpetuating kind of anxiety that's just trickling away there.
Really, and then, isn't it? Because they're being set up to fail. It's that catch-22 situation, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Like actually a catch-22.
It really is, and that's what I mean when they talk about that level of insight and just, they're really aware of the experiences that they're having.
And I think it's really relevant as well for like anyone working in kind of health structures and areas like that, because the power imbalance is equal, I think, to someone being a service user or a patient in a ward is experiencing the same kind of dilemmas and challenges as a child or a young person in a school setting. And we have to be so careful, I think, how we use power, because mental health has not got a great history of managing power and boundaries ethically. So this idea that actually, if we can think about, this experience, what it's like to try and exist in a system that actually is set up for itself rather than for your well-being, that I think will give us some insight into how we set boundaries and how we organise policy in health settings, because we're still, education is looking for flourishing and we're looking for recovery. So there's something about how we set up rules and expectations to actually promote that, and not just, the system to feed itself.
So if we look in the top left hand here, we've got social relationships, which is about having good quality social relationships. In the interviews that I did with staff, they talk a lot about, we really want pupils to be able to develop confidence. They don't have confidence to make friends, like they stick together in their twos and they don't push themselves outside of that boundary. And we're really trying to encourage them to do that, but they're really reluctant. And sometimes the two other pupils that they're friends with aren't necessarily the healthiest of choices, but they stick with them because that's where they're comfortable. And then if we think about identity below, in terms of self-awareness and a strong sense of who we are and strong sense of self, one of the other things that's really come through in my literature, in my research, in my transcribing, is plays a huge part is uniform. I'm amazed at how much of an influence it is on many of these different areas. So one of the pupils said in their interview that because we're all being made to wear exactly the same uniform, and we can't wear different colour socks, we can't wear hoodies, we can't wear jumpers, they're different. We have to wear blazers at set times. We can't take blazers off when we're hot or when we're like in class, because of the strictness of it. This pupil said, we don't get to know each other because everybody looks the same. And so if everybody looks the same, it's forcing us, and these were this person's words, it's forcing us to make judgments about other people because we have nothing else to go on. The only thing we can go on is that everyone looks the same. And so how do we build, or he didn't say authentic, but he implied these authentic friendships when we know nothing about people really, because there's no recognition of, like, I don't know, band names on jumpers or quirky socks or anything like that, which I thought was fascinating, really, kind of this insight about how the clothing we wear is also part of our identity, and us being able to see other people that are interested in the same things as us, or like the same colours as us, or dress similar to us.
I suppose as well, if you're on a real tight schedule and you can't even like walk and chat at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
practically that opportunity to mix is being policed really as well.
Yeah.
That's really
And I think we all do it as in our own roles. Probably we'll come out of a meeting and we'll have a quick catch up about what was discussed in the meeting, or you know, gosh, that was a long meeting, or, you know, we'll just have those really informal but important, authentic moments of conversation. But if children are restricted in time and they have to walk on the one side of the corridor, so they can't sort of cross over, the kind of the opportunities for those social relationships to develop are more diluted.
It reminds me a little bit as well of, you know, the kind of false metrics that you get around health and education. So you can well imagine, can't you, that a school where all the students are quiet, moving around efficiently, wearing uniform, looks like a successful educational experience, rather than maybe, you know, having the space to collaborate, chat, express yourself. Those might be quicker ways, or more efficient and more wholesome ways of actually developing individuals, letting people problem solve. So, and it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because I think you see the same thing in the health service. You know, what you measure sort of warps and shapes the experience, instead of thinking, what does good look like, and then work backwards from there.
Yeah.
So I think you're making really interesting points there.
And I think when we think around self-regulation, part of that is about having those moments to debrief with people and to say, gosh, that lesson was really boring, or, oh, I've just had this lesson and it was PE and it was raining outside and I'm now soaking wet and cold. All of that is part of self-regulation and conversations. But I'm also seeing that opportunities for self-regulation are also being diluted. We want pupils to be able, or young people to be able to self-regulate their emotions, but we're reducing the opportunities. Or in the school that I was in, there was a reduction in opportunities to self-regulate needing to go to the toilet, or to self-regulate when you want to have a drink of water. Those opportunities, even things like when to take your coat on and off, was regulated by staff. So all those basic human needs are being taken away from young people, in my experience, to learn how to self-regulate. So when the bigger stuff happens, it's like, where are they building on the building blocks to self-regulate, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I think the other thing that sort of strikes me about this is that different people have different starting points as well. You know, so the idea that some people will have like good sleep and a good diet, some people won't have that.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not like everyone's starting at the same space, running the same race, is it? Or like every other part of life, there are people who, you know, if you have a parent who reads to you, asks you about your day, develops your self-awareness, your identity, you know, role models, really good self-regulation, you're in a very different place than somebody who doesn't have those things. It doesn't even feel safe necessarily, but they're all being judged on the same outward expectation.
Yeah. And I have to say, the school I was at was amazing. You know, in terms of schools, I loved the year that I was there. The staff were incredible. And I joked with them regularly that if ever I was stranded on an island, I want to be stranded with teachers, because they can make something amazing out of nothing. You know, they have hardly any mental health training, but what they've had was almost like a CAMS unit on site that they'd created themselves. Without the training, They brought a psychologist in. The psychologist did a little bit of training with some of the teaching assistants, and they would do some very basic CBT type of conversations. So, you know, it's not a criticism of the school itself, because they're trying to do their best, but the system is demanding more of schools.
Yeah, and the expectations aren't. But they're coming out of alignment, aren't they? About what you produce.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
And then this really, I don't know if we've got time for this slide, but this is just demonstrating those concepts in practice. So perhaps if people want to come back and read this, what I've popped up is so part of the concept analysis framework, you create and make up yourself lots of different scenarios. So this is a scenario that demonstrates those principles. And then in red, I've put where those principles are dropped into the scenario. So perhaps people could come back and read that if they wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, if you are somebody who has ambitions to do like masters and D-profs and PhDs, or if you're someone who's currently struggling through, you know, higher ed and also trying to work at the same time, please take this as like positive. You know, if you only ever look at completed, finished pieces of work, it can be really hard to imagine how you're ever going to get there. And you'll get there if you just keep going. Just keep going. And don't worry if you have to, you know, put it back a little bit or life gets in the way. Just if you keep going, you will get there and your work will be finished. So this is why it's really important. And thank you so much, Sam, for being like really open to showing work that's not quite finished, because all work is not quite finished at some point and changes and adapts. And it's really important, I think, for practitioners to understand that's what real looks like, isn't it? Exactly as you were saying, you know, some of the way that you're thinking about your work is fundamentally changing, and that's what it's supposed to do. So is there anything that you can share about your kind of journey to doing this? Before we sort of go on to the next part of it?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, in terms of doing the doctorate and how I found it, I would say I've tried and failed miserably at trying to come up with the right approach. I've realised that whenever I've tried to come up with the right approach for me, so for example, in the early days, I was getting up at 5:30 in the morning and doing an hour and a half. And then I would soon quickly get burnt out and realise that wasn't the right approach. And then I would think, right, I'll do in an evening at this time, you know, whatever I tried to come up with, the solution wasn't it. And I've learned to, for me, do an hour every day. And then if I miss some days, that's absolutely fine. But I try and do an hour every day, and I try and go with what I need. You know, if I need to sleep instead of doing some of my doctorate, then that's more important. And I also don't look ahead. I can't look at the big picture, because otherwise it just sends me into turmoil. So I do what I need to do, and I just keep going along and doing the next thing. And I enjoy it. I love this topic passionately. But even
shows.
Thank you. It is such a big piece of work, but I think be kind to yourself. Your health is really important. And don't look at the big picture. Just stay focused on what you need to do now. Someone once gave me some very wise words, and they said, just do the next thing. And that's what I've learned. Just do the next thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's exciting, isn't it? You know, I think that whilst it brings its own challenges, being able to think about our work and create and sort of grow is really key part of our profession. You know, nursing can be a bit anti-intellectual sometimes, and you know, it's really important to be caring and thoughtful. That none of that stuff is undermined by also being smart and thoughtful and drawing on a really strong evidence base. That stuff's important too. It's about that balance of it. So I love the idea that, you know, you're going to be helping us to think about these issues, and we'll be drawing on your work in a few years, I expect. It's exciting. Did you want us to go on, or did you want to
if I can just put the next slide up, just to acknowledge. So the research I did was in 4 phases. I did across a whole school year. It was critical ethnography. I spent 1 day a week across different days of the week in a secondary school for a year. Phase 1 was observational data collection. Phase 2 was designing the research with students. Phase 3 was interviewing staff across the school, and stage 4 was interviewing pupils and all of the children that engaged in the research, either through being interviewed or as part of the co-design group came up with their own pseudonym, and
Oh,
they
I
came
love
up with their own little badge. I really wanted to give a name to the child, particularly because part of promoting good mental health is about identity. So I really wanted them to choose their identity within the research. So this is all the pseudonyms of the young people that have engaged within the research. So I'd like to acknowledge all of their kind of commitment really to the research. I'm incredibly proud of the work that they've done.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And also that, you know, if you want them to be proud of who they are and what they think, then you've got to do that. I think it's lovely. And for anyone who can't see, there's loads of different colourful badges where people have picked a name and decorated it, taken up some space. It's good.
Yeah, so some of the names we've got: King Bob, Big Dave, Murphy the Marcus the Third, I think that one was, Ocean, the Riz Lord, Grealish. So lots of different names chosen by the young people.
I think we all want to meet Riz Lord.
Yeah. And then that's just my email. So s.chapman, as in two men, Chapman man, one at aston.ac.uk. If anyone's interested or doing similar work, I'd be really interested to hear from people.
Yeah, so we'll tweet those out. Tweet them out. We're not really tweeting them out anymore. What are we doing them now? Blue skying them out, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is brilliant. So we've talked a little bit about kind of what's good mental health for children. We've talked a little about your design. Can we just, I mean, obviously you are not finished, so you're not at a stage to present results or anything, but what have you noticed so far about promoting and enabling the growth of good mental health, particularly for CYP?
I think children have lost a lot of the opportunities to self-regulate.
Okay.
And I think we need to think about loosening some of the kind of the rules within schools to allow children to have that opportunity.
Interesting.
So thinking about, you know, the school I was at, children had to take their coat off before they entered the building. So allowing young people to decide when they are too hot, too cold. I think uniform is a big thing. I think we need to, if we're going to stay with uniforms, we perhaps need to allow some freedom of choice of socks, maybe choice of, you know, whether you wear a jumper or a hoodie, or, you know, just to kind of give some sense of identity to that uniform for young people, that the identity belongs to the young person and not to how adults think identity is formed.
Yeah, and no one's going to fail their GCSE because they've got different socks on, are they?
Yeah.
Not a thing.
No.
we can all take a chill on that one, I think.
Yeah,
really
definitely.
Because I think a lot of what you're talking about is, you know, it reminds me of systems, of like all that stuff around, you know, institutions, stuff that is really relevant to mental health, all the concepts around kind of panopticon, how we watch, how we support, and that it just goes right across, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Education, how we manage that power with some grace to allow people to wiggle room to be.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't even spoken about nutrition yet, but that's something that's really coming through. But just how people actually aren't realizing the value of nutrition in the role of young people's mental health. So the school I'm at, they do some amazing things. They have a food bank for some of their families. They provide breakfasts for some of the children. They even provide gifts for some of the children to give to family members who haven't got much money at Christmas. You know, they go above and beyond. They really do.
Yeah, amazing.
But the food is at lunchtime. Like, children will have a slice of pizza and it's put on a napkin and the children walk away. So we talk about sitting down for meals and valuing, you know, those opportunities again to socialise. All of that's really being pushed out, I guess, as schools are. I don't know if it's as schools are bigger. I'm not sure why.
I'm sure no one who's ever served a hospital meal can relate to that.
No.
What is it? Like, I can see I've got 2 pots of something, but I don't know what either of them are.
Yeah. But when I was at school, sorry, Nicky, I was just going to say, when I was at school, you know, we had a tray and we sat down and we ate our meal.
Yeah, definitely. Dave, I wondered if you wanted to come in with your specialist knowledge. Health visitor alert.
Well, I suppose I would say health visitor alert, not being as involved with school-age children. And just as you've been talking, Sam, I'm sure the conversations are really valuable to all the school nurses out there that are, you know, passionate about this subject and really like to know that, you know, people with the experience that you've got are considering these issues. I think a couple of things that I wanted to just ask, kind of having listened to the first part. One of the ones was about that uniform issue, that I can kind of appreciate that, you know, there's the element of wanting to let children sort of, you know, express themselves, and actually in probably not as not as a really kind of big way. You know, you can do quite minor things to express yourself through what you wear. But is there kind of the counter to that some children would find that sort of quite sort of difficult, that they'd rather have to conform and wear something that perhaps they can hide behind, because if everyone has to wear the same, then there isn't the issue about, you know, can you afford the best trainers? You know, do you wear the coolest clothes? And I kind of think, you know, I often didn't really myself look forward to the kind of the non-uniform days, because that's where, you know, people would get picked on for wearing the wrong clothes. So, you know, is that just kind of an element towards this, or is that something that should be addressed earlier on, you know, by having no uniform kind of thing?
That's a really interesting question. So I was the same as you, David. I grew up in poverty, really, and I hated mufti days, as we called them, and I'd have to borrow something of my mum's to wear to school. I hated it so much, and I was so embarrassed by it. The interviews that I've done with staff seem to be saying we're making this an issue when it doesn't need to be. They don't believe, in their experience of working in a school, that the issue of some children not being able to afford things and not wearing the right style of clothes would be an issue. And as I'm saying that out loud, I'm thinking lots of people will disagree with that. But, you know, the people that I interviewed, the staff, were quite clear. Some of them grew up in countries where there was no uniform and said there was just never any bullying. It was just the culture. It just was what it was. Other people said that, you know, if that is a concern, then we address that in other ways, that there's always going to be something that needs addressing. So we're creating a problem because we're trying to avoid another problem. Why don't we allow children to wear their own clothes, allow good mental health to flourish for the majority, but then think about how do we tackle it for the others? Because schools are still providing for some pupils. I mean, I've been to several different schools that do this now. They still provide, they buy pupils shoes, they buy them clothing. And so uniform in and of itself isn't without its problems. And then the other things that have come up in the interview with pupils as well, pupils have actually said, we like a uniform to some degree, but we want it to be flexible. Like, we want it to be t-shirt and hoodies and comfortable trousers. And then when I think about it, if we change the word uniform to suits, I think it's really strange that children learn sitting in a suit all day. But so young people are saying we'd like a uniform, but we want it to be comfortable. We want elasticated waistbands, and we want, ideally they'd want slippers. I know, but you know, they're saying, and for us to be able to choose some element of it, you know, like we can choose to wear, we'll wear the trousers and the top, but we want to be able to wear whatever t-shirt we want underneath it. So it's not all or nothing. It's finding that sweet spot, I guess, of what works.
Yeah, and I suppose just as you're talking, I'm kind of thinking that there is that bit about in there that actually, if we're trying to solve, for example, bullying by having a uniform, then actually wouldn't it be better to solve bullying by encouraging people not to bully? And it's that kind of you know, but is it a quick fix for a problem that is actually quite big and needs lots of time and lots of effort to solve it? I think the other question that I wanted to ask you, and maybe this is a little bit more provocative, is, you know, I've got an issue with the word resilience anyway, especially when it comes to, you know, staff have to be resilient, because what we're saying to him is they have to learn how to cope with horrible stuff, because we can't take away the horrible stuff. So get learning it. And I suppose there's that bit for kids. Do we need children to suffer so they can learn how to cope with suffering when they get older?
I think life happens to all of us, no matter what our age is. And I think some children, I think all children, I don't like the word suffer necessarily, but all children have challenges, and some children do suffer and others are experiencing challenges every day. And I think from such a young age, we're learning those skills from the beginning. What I would like to see is children along that growth path, if you like, to have the environment around them which helps them figure out how to do that in the best possible way that suits them. At the moment, what I see in schools, and again, this came up from the pupils in the interviews, is that you have to be in the sort of top 10%, if you like, of being explicitly, obviously in need of some support. Whereas the pupils in the interviews were saying, we'd really like support, but we don't want to have to go to a teacher to say, this is what I'm feeling. I'd like to talk to someone or have some help. They want to be able to go and access things without having to bare their soul to an adult that they perhaps don't necessarily trust. Has that answered your question?
Yeah, and I suppose again, it's that bit, isn't it, about sometimes it's just having the conversation really and thinking about these issues a little bit deeper. And I think one of the things that's really nice is that I'm kind of talking from a professional kind of viewpoint, sort of thinking about what young people might think, and what you're talking about is what young people have told you they think.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I really like about the conversation tonight. It's the way that you've been throughout the conversation, threading in the voices of young people, you know, which is the important voice in this conversation, really, isn't it? You know, it's much more important than a 45-year-old white male's voice, really.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad you said that, because that's the intention of my research, really. It's important. I mean, I've got the staff's voice, the adult voice, but I really want to give space for the children to have their voice heard.
Yeah. Really, really interesting work. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that you'll be able to come back when you are done and dusted and finish the rest of the story. I feel like we've had part one. I'm very much looking forward to finding out where you end up, because that is such an interesting journey. And also, I think what you've set out so far is actually a lot of the assumptions that people have may turn out to be quite incorrect. You know, in the same way that you can work with service users, patients all the time, but until you actually say, what do you want, what do you think, you're having an imagination about what they need. And I think we do the same thing to children all the time. You know, we're around kids all the time and we have this imagination, we know what they think or what's best. And it'd be really interesting to see what you come out with at the end, and what lessons we can take from that.
Lovely. Thank you so much for having me.
Real pleasure to have you. We're desperate to get you back and get part two so that we hear what happens. You're just going to have to work harder. So let us know if people have any questions. You know, you can put it into the chat or into Blue Sky, and we'll come back to you if we can. And you've got Sam's contact details if you need them there. But thank you very much, everyone, for watching tonight, and particular thanks to Sam for her time and her dedication and taking such an interesting topic out to us. So thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
Goodbye.